You're listening to Women's Cricket Chat with
Hannah
and Alex. Coming up on today's podcast, we've got Raf Nicholson. Now, Raf is a world-leading expert on women's cricket history, so much so that she has even written a book called Ladies and Lords, A History of Women's Cricket. Not only that, she is a cricket journalist and co-founder of CricketHer. We talk to Raf about all things cricket, how the game has moved on, her opinions on the Hey-Ho Flint Trophy, and whether or not Test cricket could be the future for women's cricket.
So how are you, Raf?
Oh, I'm just a bit knackered and we're still right at the start of the season. What's going on?
Yeah.
I'm actually really worried about the amount of cricket that's going to be played and I'm just going to be exhausted. Anyway, I guess that you've probably got similar in terms of trying to keep up with all the cricketer stuff as well now.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, we put a message in the group chat earlier, this is all the things that we need to get doing, but everybody's doing exams and stuff at the moment, so it's fallen at the wrong time for people because Lucy and Cassie are final years at the moment. Obviously, we're all volunteers at the moment. It's still trying to, monetize at the moment. I've got PhD deadlines that I need to get sorted and get done ASAP. Alex is back to work full time, so it's all just happening at the moment, and we're just we want to just do cricket. How can we try and get a better balance? But it will all work out, won't it, Alex?
I'd like to say so. I'm trying to be more positive this year than negative, so hopefully. But we are, in terms of podcasting, we are going to take a break when the 100 is on, just because I don't think we'll be able to get a day where we can all sit down and just discuss what's going on because we'll all be busy.
So yeah, I think we'll probably have 4 more episodes going out, including yours, and then we're going to have a bit of a summer break and then because I was we can do more off season with the profile pieces because there's so much noise going on anyway with the match reports and everything else. I think it's okay for us to take a step back during that time and just focus on behind the scenes stuff maybe, but yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, so Sid and I kind of moved from a while back from doing straight match reports because we were when we first started CricketHer, nobody was doing that.
Yeah.
And now a lot more people are doing match reports, so we try and do more, I don't know, a little bit more kind of featuresy or a bit more technical. But yeah, you're right, it's kind of about how you can add value in the existing space, isn't it? Which is obviously what you're doing with the podcasts.
Yeah, I hope so. That's what we're trying to do, isn't it? It's just adding value and supporting what everybody else is doing too. It's not trying to, I don't know, it's not trying to be competitive, it's trying to be collaborative, isn't it? So it's trying to find that little niche and building our little angle to complement everybody else's angles. So yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. It's been very fast paced at the moment. So
it's great. It's really exciting. Well done.
Yeah, thank you. And now we need to focus on you rather than us anyway. So
okay.
First question is just simply, how did you get involved with cricket? Because I've read some stories before about getting hit on the head with a cricket ball and things like that, and I'd love to hear more about how you've got your passion for the game.
I think the story about getting hit in the face with the cricket ball doesn't reflect well on my cricketing abilities generally. But yeah, so I grew up with a dad who was really passionate about cricket, but mainly or exclusively men's cricket, as is quite common probably at that time. So yeah, he passed on his love of cricket to me, and so I was kind of growing up in the late 90s, early noughties, giving away my age there, and kind of watching a lot of men's cricket. And then I went to university and I played a little bit of cricket at not a very high level at all. And I was late to a meeting so I was studying history, and in our final year we had to do an original piece of research, so a dissertation, and I was late to the meeting with my supervisor because I'd been playing in cricket and I got hit. I dropped the ball onto my own face basically, and ended up with quite a nasty bruise, and it was quite painful. And yeah, so that happened. And so I turned up at the meeting and I said, I'm very sorry, and explained what had happened. And she said, oh, okay, that's interesting, because we haven't decided on a topic for your research yet. So have you thought about looking at the history of women's cricket? And I hadn't. And then I did. And I realised that there hadn't been a lot written about it. And I became really interested and kind of passionate about women's cricket from that point on, really. So yeah, I suppose I was a bit of a late convert. But at that time, there was still not very many people kind of focusing on women's cricket, and there was a lot less. I think Twitter was just about around at that time, but not really very much, which has obviously kind of been one of the amazing things that has enabled chat about women's cricket to grow. So yeah, that's kind of how it came about, and that's the story about me being hit in the face.
Yeah, because Who was it who got hit on the head with an apple? Was that Newton?
It was, yeah. Are you comparing me to Isaac Newton?
I was going to say, all good things must, getting hit in the head, and then look at your career since. So,
okay, you know what? I've never thought about that as a comparison before, but I love it. I'm going to use it going forward. Thanks, Hannah.
No worries. I'll pass you across to Alex for the next question.
Yeah, so you're obviously quite an established cricket journalist. Was journalism, and specifically sport and cricket, was it something you always wanted to do, or was it something that you fell into?
Well, I'm sort of an academic as well. And so I guess that the journalism came about because I was doing a PhD, a bit like Hannah at the moment, looking at women's cricket. And I then it was 2013, the summer of 2013, it was this really big Women's Ashes series. And I was kind of midway through my PhD at that point. And I started a blog just about the research. And at that time, as I said, there weren't many people kind of writing about women's cricket. And it sort of got a bit noticed first of all by Jared Kimber at ESPN Cricinfo. And then they published a few bits by me. And then, I got asked to cover the 2013 Women's Ashes series by, it was All Out Cricket magazine. It's now become Wisden Cricket Monthly magazine. And so that was my first taste. And it was kind of, at that point, it was very much on a sort of match by match basis. And it was really exciting. It was very strange. And it was all a bit of a kind of crazy panic, because academic writing is very much, you have loads of time and you have like days and months, and you're encouraged to think very carefully about everything you write, whereas journalism is the complete opposite, and you have to think very quickly and produce your words as soon as the match ends. And that, I found that really challenging. So it kind of came about slightly by accident, because I was doing the PhD and became known as somebody who sort of knew a bit about women's cricket, really.
That's what I'm trying to deal with at the moment, because people are coming to me like, oh, you're cricket, and I'm like, yeah, I'm cricket, but I'm also other things. But and when you get messages at 11 o'clock at night about, oh, have you seen this latest thing? And I'm like, I'm trying to get to bed, I'm trying to switch off. And when your academic work is cricket as well, how do you manage to be able to switch off as well? Because that's what I'm really struggling with at the moment. I love cricket and I love doing the media stuff, I love doing the research, but finding that balance just to keep sane is so important.
Yeah, it is hard. And I think that for me as well, I'm going to hopefully next year be marrying somebody who also is a sort of part-time women's cricket writer. So hi, Sid. And so my entire life, my love life as well, has kind of revolved around women's cricket, and still does. So I don't know that I'm necessarily a very good role model in the sense of kind of switching off from women's cricket. I think that I do enjoy the variety, and I think that it is kind of changing up between writing academic stuff and writing more sort of popular media articles, and those are two quite different things. So even though the subject material is similar, I find the process to be different enough that I enjoy switching between the two, I suppose. But you're right, it is a challenge. And the thing with journalism as well is, I've got what's meant to be a kind of full-time academic job at the moment, but obviously journalism doesn't wait. So if a story breaks, then you have to kind of try and find the time to cover it, whatever else is happening. So at the moment, for example, I'm meant to be marking essays, and I'm talking to you guys, which, to be fair, is much more fun.
We love that. And you were talking about being a fan of cricket in the 90s and the noughties. Was that predominantly men's cricket or women's cricket, or a mixture? And if so, what are some of the major differences you've seen since you started following women's cricket?
Yeah, it was really exclusively men's cricket, which I actually feel quite ashamed about looking back. But it really was a time when there was very little media coverage of women's cricket, and you would have really had to seek it out very hard. And of course, a lot of my interest was coming from my dad. So yeah, it was kind of people like Nasser Hussain and who else, kind of Michael Vaughan and that kind of generation. And obviously the 2005 Ashes was 2005 men's Ashes, I should say, because obviously subsequently I've realised that the women's Ashes being played that same summer was equally exciting, but at the time I didn't have really very much awareness of it. So yeah, it was all kind of that stuff. In terms of the changes in women's cricket, it's changing all the time so quickly. It's so difficult to keep up. A few years ago, I can remember a lot, for example, the England women's team in the 2014 Women's World T20. I think in the entire tournament, I think they maybe hit 1 or 2 sixes. And I do remember at the time they got quite a bit of criticism for that, because sides like Australia were hitting a lot more sixes. But you just think now, if there's only kind of 1 or 2 sixes hit in one women's T20, we would go, oh, that's a bit of an anomaly. That's a bit strange. So, yeah, I think that as we've kind of moved into the professional era, and before that, the sort of semi-professional era, it's just amazing the difference that being able to train properly can make. And yeah, so power hitting is one of the big things, and the other thing that's just advanced kind of beyond recognition is the fielding as well. It's hilarious now to think about women kind of playing international cricket in skirts, isn't it, given what they are now kind of capable of. But I think even in the last sort of 6 or 7 years since England got their professional contracts, the fielding is amazing. And now you get these incredible clips of kind of Fran Wilson going viral on Twitter to take a catch that you just 10 years ago nobody would really have thought of taking, I think. So yeah, those are probably the 2 biggest areas of change, I think.
And you're just talking about sixes as well. I heard from the Lightning lot, I don't know what kind of match, whether it was just a training game or whatever it may be, but Kirsty Gordon hitting sixes as like one of the lower down order kind of batters, and I was like, Kirsty's hitting sixes kind of thing. And I know that sounds really stupid and it's a weird comment to make, but I was like, wow, it does make such a difference that players are getting more time just to hone in on their trade and like do shots that are scoring the maximums without I don't know. It's just, bizarre. It's not that bizarre.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but you want your number 10, your number 11. Not saying that Kirsty's necessarily a number 11. She'll be really cross with me for saying that. But, you do want people all the way down to number 11 to be coming in and contributing with the bat, don't you? And that's a relatively new thing, I think.
Yeah, no, I think so. Because I was trying to word that and I was like, this just sounds like I'm really causing offence without...
Yeah, sorry, Kirsty.
Yeah, no, absolute gun batter. But thinking about your academics as well, obviously. So it all started from that dissertation, was it? Is that what set you into that path of going down, right, I'm going to do my master's, my PhD, whichever way? Did you have to do a master's first or did you go straight into a PhD?
I did do a master's, yeah. So, yeah, I did the undergrad dissertation on the history of women's cricket, kind of the just immediately post First World War period, and then I did my master's dissertation on women's cricket and other women's sport during the Second World War, and then I did the PhD, and that was kind of the entire history of women's cricket, but particularly focusing on post 1945. So yeah, I've kind of progressed chronologically, I think.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering then, because I guess that's a really nice research path to go on as well, though, because it has maintained that focus and it's allowed you to narrow in. And obviously producing books, you've got another one on the go, haven't you? So I've got your Ladies and Lords next to me.
Great.
I absolutely loved that, and it's helped so much with my PhD. I did message you a while back being like, how do I not just reference Nicholson 2020 or 2021? I
think it might be 2019.
2019. I was in my head, I was like 2019, and I was like, no, it's 2020. Is it 2021? It's 2019. So I was like, how do I stop referencing in my women's cricket section Nicholson 2019? Nicholson 2019. It's just honestly the whole page is just Nicholson, and I'm like, but honestly, like, you're the world leading expert on women's cricket. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about that book, but also the book you've got on the go at the moment.
Yeah, so Ladies and Lords is kind of almost like the book of the PhD thesis, but slightly extended. And it's kind of more of an academic history, I suppose. And there's lots of footnotes and there's a bit of feminist theory in there. There's not a huge amount of actual kind of blow-by-blow accounts of cricket matches. So I think maybe some people expect that when they pick it up. But yeah, it was kind of more designed to be a sort of thematic analysis of some of the interesting stuff about, how does the growth of women's cricket relate to the growth of feminism and stuff like that. And the new book, which is hopefully coming out later this year, The Women in White, which is going to be published by Fairfield Books. So I'm giving it a nice plug here. I wrote it during the second and third lockdowns, so between about October 2020 and March 2021. So I decided that I was going to try and use the time a bit productively, and it's much more of a kind of popular book, and designed more for kind of the non-academic standard reader who just wants to know a bit more about the actual cricket that was played and who the key players were, and their lives and things like that. So there is a bit of overlap, and obviously it's based on the same research, but I kind of want that to more become the sort of standard one that people might go into Waterstones and think, oh, I want to buy a cricket book, oh, this is a women's cricket book, and just kind of help people realise that it's kind of related to your work in a way, because thinking about kind of how we increase the visibility of women's cricket, because I think that by drawing attention to the history of it, that's a really important aspect, and kind of helping people see that actually women have been playing cricket for generations. It's not in any way a new thing, which I think sometimes people think it is because they've only just become aware of it. So yeah, it's very much that. And then obviously, you've had some legends from history on the podcast like Enid Bakewell, and if we can get their stories better known, then that's really important, I think.
Massively, like that's why we wanted to get those kind of people on as well, because like you said with my research, that's why I've been drawing on so much for your research, because I would love to go down that history route, and I get so interested and so wrapped up in it, and my supervisor like, you meant to focus on social media, not the history. It's just one short section about the history of the game, not a whole thesis on it. And I'm like, I get so wrapped up in reading about all these amazing people and players. And I think with women's sport generally, it gets repackaged year on year. It's a summer of women's sport. It's like every year's the summer of women's sport, and it's just always gets packaged up like it's new and exciting, and it's like you forget the history, and that's why your work is so important.
Yeah, it seems to be a thing about you academics writing books. There's you writing your book, and then you writing a couple in lockdown. There's my former lecturer, Richard Thomas, he wrote a book called Cricketing Lives, a characterful history from pitch to page. And I like that it's not just solely focused on men. He talks about Sarah Taylor as well. I don't know if you know him, because he also writes for Wisden, I believe. So
I don't know him, but I've come across the book and I've been meaning to read it because I saw that it had I think a couple of chapters on women's cricket, so that's great.
Yeah, but one of the questions I wanted to know is, you have your established brand of CricketHer, I believe it's called CricketHer. I did get that right, didn't I?
You did get that right, and it's actually really hilarious because a few years ago somebody wrote that I was the editor of the CricketHer, because it was one letter different, and I was a bit like, oh, I don't know that the cricketer would be very happy about that. But that was quite funny.
But with regards to CricketHer, what made you decide to set it up?
I think I can probably blame Sid for that, to be honest. What happened was we were both writing individual women's cricket blogs, and then we met and we were sort of spending a bit of time together and seeing each other at a few matches. And we, one evening we were just like, oh, why don't we kind of combine our efforts, really? And at that time, there was really not very much coverage. There was a little bit of coverage of the England stuff, but really no coverage at all of domestic women's cricket, which, back in, I think it was 2014 or 2015, we set up CricketHer. At that point, obviously, it was women's county cricket, and that was it. No Kia Super League, no 100, no regions. It was purely county cricket. And the other thing that happened was we went to this really exciting, it was a playoff. It was for Division 1, Division 2 of the Women's County Championship. And I think it was Somerset v Warwickshire. And Warwickshire needed about 15 or 20 runs off the last over, and Anya Shrubsole was bowling. And so you're like, okay, well, they're not going to get there in a million years. And Somerset were playing for their place in Division 1 to be promoted. Hannah, actually, do you remember this match?
I'm not sure, because I'm trying to think. I remember it going on. I don't know if I was involved or not. I might have been carrying the drinks on, but I might not. You're testing my memory. I was just thinking, I was like, oh God, I'm going to have a little Google of a scorecard and see if I was actually there.
Okay. Well, anyway, I'm afraid it didn't end very well for Somerset. So I can't even remember who the batters were now. But yeah, they just absolutely boshed it. And Shrubsole just kind of sort of sank to her haunches, and she was really upset about it. And yeah, it was this incredible match, but nobody was writing about it. Nobody was reporting on it. It's still one of the most amazing finishes to a women's match that I've ever seen. And so at that point, we kind of looked at each other and we're like, okay, let's do it. Let's write about domestic women's cricket, because it needs to be written about. And this is where the England players are coming from. And yeah, so that happened. And then gradually domestic women's cricket has grown, and we have seen the KSL, and now we're seeing regional cricket, and it's, domestic cricket is becoming professionalized, and that's really exciting. But yeah, that was kind of the reason behind it, was that we just thought that domestic cricket wasn't getting any coverage, and we wanted to try and show why it should get coverage.
And with CricketHer, what's been the best story that you've got to cover so far?
There's been quite a few, but the one that I'm really proud of is something that happened during 2016 when so this was at the point where the women's and men's World T20s were still happening at the same time. So they weren't standalone at that point. So the England women's team and the England men's team were getting on the same flight to India for this tournament. And the day before they flew, the ECB got all the players, the men's and women's, together, and they did this thing. I think it was called Pledge for Parity or something. It was supposed to be a hashtag campaign, and they got them all to kind of hold signs up, and it was great. And they got on the plane to the tournament, and the men turned left and went into business class, and the women turned right and went into economy. And we found out about this by various journalistic means and were really quite cross about it. And the thing was that the players had been told, don't tweet anything on the plane, don't make it clear that this is the disparity. And so we were angry because we felt that they'd been almost asked to cover this thing up that was a very visible symbol of inequality, while at the same time waving these signs that said Pledge for Parity. So we ran the story on CricketHer and we said, it's a hollow campaign, it's meaningless because the men turned left and the women turned right on the plane. And it got picked up by ESPN, I think a couple of other kind of more major outlets. And then a few months later, the ICC changed the regs and now women fly business class to World Cups. And I'd like to think that we can take a little bit of credit for that by actually highlighting the issue and highlighting the difference between the kind of rhetoric and the reality. So I feel really quite proud of that.
I've just managed to find that scorecard as well, and I wasn't running on the drinks, unfortunately, that match. But the names that are on the two teams, for like Somerset, people like Sophie LeMarchand, you got Anya, Sophie Luff, Fran Wilson, Lauren Shrubsole, Anya's sister, obviously, Jackie Hawker, Moira Comfort, Lorraine Shapansky, who was recently in the Western Storm warm-up stuff, hasn't actually made the squad at the moment, but there's still time. Cassie, who is obviously with us. But then on the flip side for Warwickshire women, you've got Helen Shipman hit 124.
Oh, legend.
Absolute legend. She now does a lot of S&C. She was with Lightning and I think she's moved to GB Rowing or something. Do S&C with them. You got Amy Jones, Georgia Hennessy, Marie Kelly, Laura Crofts, Liz Russell, Georgia Davis, Anisha Patel, Sian Kelly.
Amazing.
Those names, like, they're still around today, aren't they? And it's so good to see that those players 7 years later are still playing the game.
Yeah, and that a lot of people would now kind of know Marie Kelly's name, whereas back then they wouldn't have. And that was sort of what we were trying to push for. And I think maybe we made a little bit of a difference. I mean, obviously we can't claim any credit for the setting up of the regions and the professional structure, but I think that we were just trying to show that domestic women's cricket was really exciting and worth people paying attention to, I suppose.
And that is what's so important, though, because like with our podcast, we're trying to find that niche to, do the profile pieces, to get to know people on a deeper level. But that's only possible because of the work you did and you continue to do. So I wouldn't undersell yourself in terms of the impact that CricketHer has had in the representing the counties, given a space to have those discussions, opinions, and whatever it may be, whether people agree or disagree, is a conversation that you've started.
I hope so. That's very sweet of you to say. That's all we were trying to do, really, was just provide, a source of information for people. And I hope that we've managed to do that.
You certainly have done. So don't be too modest and humble, like shout about it, because, we need, because that's what I'm really interested in as well, is the bloggers and, the podcasters or whatever it may be, what role this community does have on that women's cricket visibility piece. I think it's just so important, and it's unfortunate that we've had to take it on ourselves, because you would have hoped that there would have been other support and stuff. And it just brings me on to because I saw you got into the chain on Twitter yesterday about the Rachel Hare Flint Trophy Twitter page. I know Abby Slade and a few others have set this up on Twitter because at the moment there isn't a dedicated channel for it. So what's your thoughts about that? And tell us a little bit more about perhaps the issues that is currently facing this competition so far.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that at the point that I got involved in that debate, I hadn't quite clocked that the men's competitions all have their own Twitter account. So I suppose viewed in that light, you could say, well, it's just about kind of giving the women parity. So I completely understand where Abby's coming from with it. Obviously, what you want really is for there to be as many people on Twitter shouting about it as possible. So I don't really have any problem with setting up a different account, but I suppose really it would be great to see the ECB tweeting about it from kind of their own account. And then obviously there is this issue about whether you have kind of separate women's and men's accounts and things like that. And should the ECB have a kind of separate ECB women's account, and the fact that obviously sometimes from the main account we know that people are being told, oh well, don't tweet too much about the women's stuff because people aren't going to be very interested and they'll unfollow it. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting philosophical question, isn't it? My view is that there's room for both, and that the ECB should be tweeting about it from their main account, and there should also be a kind of ECB women's account as well. Yeah, and I think some of it is kind of based on assumptions about the fact that people who are interested in women's cricket will be existing men's cricket fans as well, which I think is really quite a problematic assumption, and isn't necessarily true. And certainly as I've got older, I've become less and less interested in men's cricket and more passionate about women's cricket, because I think that I don't want to say anything bad about the men's game, but I love covering women's cricket because everyone in it, like pretty much everyone in it, are like really great to work with. As a journalist, it's so easy to work with the players. They will pretty much always talk to you, and they normally have something really interesting and original and something to say that's funny or amusing, or, you know, they generate stories in a way that I think is maybe a bit harder in men's cricket when you've got people who are really kind of hardened professionals who have had years of media training and have kind of maybe had some of that personality drummed out of them. So for me, I would say, you know, if you ask me to name the current England men's test team, I might struggle, and I'd happily admit that. And, you know, occasionally I get asked to go and cover men's cricket as well. Sorry, we've kind of gone off the topic slightly, but when people say, oh, do you want to go and cover this men's match, I'm like, well, no, because I wouldn't really know where to start. I wouldn't know the players. And I think that's kind of funny because so often there are people in the women's press box, a bit less common now, but certainly when I started out, who had no idea who any of the players were. You know, if Catherine Brunt had come and punched him in the face, they wouldn't have known who it was. Sorry. Not that she would do that, of course, but you understand the point that I'm trying to make. And yeah, so I think there's a big disparity in some of those things. Yeah, I think after I waded into that Twitter debate yesterday, I was kind of second guessing myself and going, oh, well, maybe Abby Slade's right. So I think maybe it's not necessarily as straightforward as always just copying everything that the men do, and that we shouldn't necessarily kind of fixate on having to copy everything exactly. But yeah, good on her for starting the account, and hopefully it gets lots of followers.
And just on the topic of social media and Twitter, I'm not sure if you saw that tweet by, was it Women's County Cricket, where they had a screenshot of a gentleman called Tom saying that Enid Bakewell, right, you shouldn't call her a legend because XYZ. So we wanted to get your opinion on that. And also, why do you think that people like perhaps Enid Bakewell and Rachel Hayhoe-Flynn aren't quite given the respect that their male counterparts are given?
You know what, with people like Tom, I've kind of reached a point where I just think sometimes it's not worth engaging with anymore, because there's so much in a minority now, you know, people like that. And sometimes I go on my Guardian pieces and read a bit below the line. And sometimes I get people tweeting at me saying, you know, why are you tweeting about women's cricket? Nobody cares. And I just think, well, why are you following me then? Why are you paying any attention? Why are you reading my piece on the Guardian website? It's clear what it's about. All you're doing is adding to the clicks. And then I can make a better case to the Guardian for why they should, you know, be giving me more pieces to write. So great. Thanks very much, Tom. What you've actually done is generated a load of attention and a load of people saying, we think Enid is a brilliant person and an absolute legend. So yeah, he's kind of shot himself in the foot there, to be honest. Why do I think that people like Enid Bakewell and Rachel Hayhoe-Flynn aren't given the kind of the same respect as legends from men's cricket. They're becoming better known, and especially those two I think are reasonably well known now, but it is all about the kind of media coverage that they've had, isn't it, and the visibility in the public eye. So yeah, I think that as women's cricket grows and it's covered more, those names will become better known. Ultimately I think it's going to sound like, well, I mean, I am a feminist, so I'm just going to say it. Men feel threatened by women's sport. No, some men feel threatened by women's sport because it's about us as women feeling empowered and going out there and doing things that make us feel good about our bodies and about ourselves. And, I read a really influential book during my PhD and it was called The Stronger Women Get, the More Men Love Football. And it was basically saying that men don't like women to kind of participate in sport because they feel like it's their arena and they feel threatened. And that one of the sentences that stuck with me ever since is running is a feminist act. And I'm a runner, well, a very slow runner. And so sometimes when I really don't want to put on my trainers, I just think, no, this is a feminist act. This is like me empowering myself to feel good about myself, basically. So yeah, I think that some men feel threatened by that, but they're not the type of men that we want to, that we want involved in women's cricket. So go away, basically.
Yeah, because I know there is the debate about the statue for Baroness Rachel Hayhoe Flint about whether or not she should get a statue. Personally, I think she should because she did a lot for both men's cricket and women's cricket, because I think people seem to fail to realise that if it wasn't for the likes of Rachel Hayhoe Flint, Ian Bakewell, there wouldn't be a men's World Cup because the women were the first people to have a World Cup. So what is your opinion on advocating for statues, and not just statues, but having ground with female cricketers' names? Like if Surrey, for instance, were to have the Ebony Rainford Brent stand, what is your thought on that?
I think it's really important. And I think I wrote a blog post about this. This is probably one of the first blog posts that I wrote in, when would it have been, sort of 2010, 2011, basically saying that we should have an Enid Bakewell statue probably at Trent Bridge, because that was her kind of local ground. They're having the Rachel Hayhoe Flint one at Lord's makes sense because of all of the work that she did to get women admitted to the MCC. I guess Edgbaston might be another nice location because that's where the first Women's World Cup final was played. And she wasn't a Brummie, she was from the Black Country, but it's that sort of neck of the woods, isn't it? I can just hear all the people from the Midlands now getting really cross. So yeah, no, I think it's important because I remember walking into Lord's for the first time with my dad, and I was probably about 11 or 12, and just feeling this amazing sense of kind of awe at entering. It just feels like a really special space. And I go to Lord's a lot more now, although not been for 18 months, obviously. But yeah, I try never to lose that feeling of when you walk into Lord's, when you walk through the Grace Gates, it's just this feeling of kind of being in a really special place. But I did also feel, and especially kind of looking back, it did feel like a very male space. All of the portraits and all of the names, it's all about men. And, so Dad would kind of use that. He'd say, oh, we're sitting in the Compton stand, or we're sitting in the Edrich stand, and these were these great players from the past. How great would it be if, dads or mums can take their daughters in future and be like, oh, this is the Hayhoe Flint stand, or this is the Bakewell stand, or whatever. So that's kind of how I look at it. And I think that some people kind of think, oh, it's, there's more important things to worry about, equal pay and things like that. But it's the kind of symbolism, isn't it? And the fact that we're trying to turn cricket into a sport where everyone feels at home.
Definitely. And part of my research as well with like my ethnography, where like going into the tournament and stuff like that, is looking at feminizing the arena, whether you like it or not, like the pinking it up, the purpling it up. You don't have to go down that marketing route at all. But thinking about recently Gloucester, their ground, Gloucestershire at Bristol County Ground, they've now put up the graffiti of Western Storm on the walls. And little things like that make such a difference, because if, a dad and their daughter is walking down the side, she looks up and she's like, oh, that's Sophie Luff on the wall. I want to be like her. For the first time they can see it to be it. And it's so important to have, like you say, that symbolism. And I think if we can get those conversations happening, if we can get people in positions of power to actually stop for a moment and be like, wow, there's so many, stands named after men or boardrooms named after men, like, let's shake it up a bit. Let's make it more representative, and let's make women feel at home within these grounds, because more women will be playing at those grounds. Historically, yes, we haven't been able to be playing at the county grounds or at Lords, etc. But it's going to happen, and that space does need to reflect the female fans, the female players, and the female staff members all involved, doesn't it?
Yeah, and actually you did mention Surrey there, Alex. So a couple of years ago, I was able to attend the opening of the Janet Britton room in the pavilion at the Oval, and it was really exciting. And she's obviously kind of a legend of Surrey cricket. And they invited loads of Women's Cricket Association members, and it felt like a real kind of celebration of the past. And to all of those women that were there, that was so meaningful, and it really kind of felt like to them, I think that we're being recognised. Because somebody who we loved, who sadly passed away early from cancer, somebody who we loved is being memorialised in this way, and it really meant a great deal, and to her parents and her partner. So it was a really special occasion, and how great now that there's that room in the pavilion that people can go to and go, oh, it's the Jan Britton room. So I think kudos to Surrey for doing that, and more counties should be following that.
We just need more of it, don't we? Just more.
Yeah, that's the I think with everything that we do, that's the dilemma, is balancing kind of being really happy and excited about the progress that's been made and about all the cool things that are happening, versus kind of recognizing that there's still a long way to go and that we need to be part of that fight, and not to kind of underestimate that. And I think sometimes I maybe haven't got that balance right, and I'm sure that there might be people at the ECB who think that I'm a bit too negative sometimes, but it really is purely driven by this passion for wanting there always to be the next step, and they're all, and women's cricket so it was Billie Jean King, I think, who said, people just want women to be content with the crumbs, but I want them to have the whole cake and the cherry on top. And that's how I really feel about women's cricket. And so I'm always kind of fighting and looking for the next thing to achieve. But obviously it's great that something like the new regional professional contracts are just so exciting for all of the people involved. So we've come a long way since I started covering women's cricket.
And you mentioned the Hey-Ho Flint Trophy. What's your opinion on the changing format from it being two separate groups to them all playing each other?
I think it's better, to be honest. I totally understand why they did that last year. In some ways it's quite a miracle that they managed to get it off the ground, given that they were starting from scratch. And obviously it was about trying to limit the travel. But it was disappointing, for example, for Western Storm last year, who to some extent would have had a good claim to be in the final, and actually just ended up in the group with Southern Vipers and therefore couldn't get to the final. So that the fact that they all get to play each other now, I think is better. It makes the competition more exciting, and it means that genuinely you're recognising the two best teams.
But also with the Rachel Hey-Ho Flint Trophy, I think it's so hard, because we were doing our preview episodes with the CricketHer, and it's so hard to really be critical and analyse the performances last year because it was so short, wasn't it? So what's your thoughts about the teams going into the season? Is there any teams that you've taken your fancy to, that you think have got the best shots this summer?
It's hard to look past Southern Vipers, isn't it? They were so strong last year, and they won every single game, and they've got a near identical squad this time around, although they've added a spinner who we saw in the women's county matches, because Sid and I were lucky enough to be accredited to attend some of them. So Finty Trussler, she's like their mystery spinner. So it's very interesting, and there seems to be a difference of opinion about what she actually bowls. So she's a bit of a secret weapon. So I think Vipers are going to be probably the team to beat, to be honest. And I think if the other teams are really honest with themselves, then that's the match that they'll all be targeting. I was in a media opportunity with the South East Stars on Wednesday, and I was like, oh, which team are you really kind of excited about playing, or really the match that you're really targeting? And they very diplomatically said, oh, they're all really important, but you know what they really think. Anyway, that's my opinion. But hopefully it will be a really strong competition, because that's what we want. It was great for Vipers last year, but actually what you really want is for it to be a close competition, and for there to be really hard fought matches, and for one team not to kind of run away with the trophy, I suppose. So that's what I'm hoping for.
So what other names from the county matches that we saw last month as well stood out for you? Was there any players who weren't on your radar previously that did step up?
So we saw Millie Home for Worcestershire against Berkshire, and I think she top scored in both of the T20 matches that we saw. In that context, she looked in a different class in terms of the power that she was able to kind of put into the ball. So I think she's probably one that I'd look out for, and kind of seems to be in decent nick. I mean, it's not really an unknown name, but the other person who we've seen perform really well this season with the bat was Susie Rowe for Kent against Essex. She hit, it was 60 odd on, it was a very tricky pitch. And I don't think anyone else scored a half century that day. That was in the London Championship. So it was a 50 over match, which is obviously relevant going into the Hey-Ho Flint. So yeah, I think, you know, in our CricketHer preview, we had a golden oldie category, and I don't know whether she'd appreciate being described as a golden oldie, but she definitely is in the sense that she's been around for a while, but she's still got it.
I like that. They're golden. Maybe not old, but they're golden. But yeah, I want to flip it back again to your history work slightly, because I just thought of a question around the difficulties and challenges that you face as an academic trying to access the history of women's cricket. Do you have to overcome many challenges when you are doing your research?
I certainly did at the start of the PhD, because at that point I didn't know what kind of manuscript sources I was going to find. And I thought at one point that it was going to have to be a PhD kind of that was largely based around oral history interviews. But quite early on, I discovered that there was a Women's Cricket Association archive. So the Women's Cricket Association ran women's cricket up until the ECB took over in 1998. And there was this archive, and it was in boxes at the time that I discovered it, and it was being kept in, I describe it as a cowshed, but it was an England player who'd retired and then gone on and married a farmer. She was living on this farm and had this outbuilding space available to store the archives. So it was about 8 or 10 boxes. So I went and basically lived in her cowshed for a couple of weeks and went through all that stuff, and it's just amazing. And I think at that point I kind of maybe gently said, you might want to think about moving it somewhere else at some point. And you know, if there are any archivists listening, then they'll just be absolutely horrified by the idea that this really valuable historical material was being kept in a cowshed. But it's now safely at Lord's in the MCC archive, so that's great, because I think that will mean it's much more accessible to people, and it's obviously being stored in a way that means that it will still be with us hopefully in kind of 100-200 years. So I found that, and then every person that I interviewed, I would go round and they would say, oh, I've got this huge box of stuff that I just happen to have in my loft or my garage or my spare room, do you want to look through some of this? So there was more material that way. So uncovered some really exciting things, and obviously got to also do oral history interviews, so it was kind of the best of both worlds really. I think that sometimes with women's sport history, that is how the material is. It's kind of in the hands of individuals, and we could really probably do with a kind of central women's sport archive somewhere. But that's for an archivist to think about setting up.
I guess that links on to your next research project at the moment around, is it sports governing bodies and mergers between men's and women's, if I've got that correct?
Yep.
So how's that going at the moment as well? Because I guess you're looking at the WCA and also the ECB merger, but others as well?
Yes, so there were a lot in a very short space of time in the 1990s. So I'm looking at squash, football, athletics, hockey, obviously cricket, and then maybe rugby union as well. A lot of these kind of team sports went through these mergers in a relatively short space of time. And it's a really interesting kind of phenomenon. And I was sort of trying to find out why and what was driving it. And it was very much kind of being driven by the government saying, well, we only want to fund one governing body for men's and women's sport. And to some extent, what then happens is that the women who had been involved in running the women's side of things for decades, in most cases, then got pushed out by the existing men's body and kind of got taken over rather than it being a genuine merger. So it does, there are some differences between sports. So something like women's hockey is a little bit different because they've got a lot more women's participants in hockey by the 90s than men's participants. So it's done slightly more equitably in some sports, but certainly in cricket it's really problematic. And a lot of people who I interviewed during the PhD, and this is kind of why I decided to do the research, said, not very happy with how the merger was handled and what's happened since. And actually you'd think that people might go, it's really exciting because the ECB now being under the umbrella of the ECB, we get all this funding, we get all this support and much more visibility. And so there have been total upsides. But for many of the women who really kind of ran the sport and cared very passionately about it, they now don't really feel that sense of connection with it anymore. And I think that's really sad. And that actually we lost a lot of wisdom when that merger went through in 1998. And that's a real shame. And of course now the ECB and the ICC and whoever else are kind of waking up and going, well, hang on a minute, we really want more women involved in running the game. We want more women coaches. We want more women umpires. And I'm sat here going, well, you kind of had that 20 years ago and you push them away. Quite unfortunate. So yeah, to some extent the research is about trying to recognise some of those women and the role that they played, and it's also about going, okay, well, what's the best way to run cricket now, and women's cricket specifically, that reflects a better system whereby kind of women's cricket is prioritised and not just being run by, tends to be men who don't really care very much about it.
We've seen a lot of that recently with the BCCI, haven't we? So it's a very important topic and really essential research as well, because like you said, there were women involved in the game. It's not like women coming to sport is completely brand new. There is a long history, and it's so important to recognise those voices. But I think the final one for me is just looking ahead to this 2021 season. As a journalist, what are you most looking forward to covering, and any exciting projects outside of academia you've got on the go?
It's a bit cliched, but I'm really excited about the test, because we just don't see women's tests very often, and we certainly don't see women's tests featuring India very often. And the last time around, when England played India in 2014, England got absolutely thrashed, which was kind of, it wasn't fun for England, but it was kind of interesting to watch, and it got quite a lot of attention. So I'm hoping for another kind of really exciting match. And yeah, there's just nothing quite like covering a test. So yeah, really excited about that. In terms of kind of projects on the go, hoping to do a bit of research looking at the hundreds, and obviously it's being very much kind of billed as this really exciting real step forward for women's cricket, and kind of almost like a tournament that's predicated on gender parity. And it will be interesting to see to what extent the media coverage around it and the actual day-to-day realities of the women's and men's teams reflect that. But yeah, I think the 100 will be exciting, and it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Just quickly, with the test between England and India, do you think having this one-off test will help us see more tests in the women's game and make test match cricket a viable option for women to play?
I obviously hope it will. I've been a really passionate campaigner for more women's test cricket for quite a while now. I think it does worry me somewhat that at the moment we haven't been given any indication that the series is going to be played for points like the Women's Ashes is. I don't know whether that might change at the last minute, but it sounds like they're playing, or the BCCI have not agreed to play it for points. So that means that the test will just kind of be a standalone event. And obviously that was the case in the 2014 one, the last time India played England in a test, and they then haven't played another one for 7 years. And so, there's obviously a concern that it will just be a one-off event, therefore. Whereas if you have something like the Women's Ashes, the multi-format points-based series, then it really ties both of the boards into playing it like that forever. Maybe not forever, but it solidifies the format. So I hope it does. Don't necessarily know if it will. We've obviously heard recently that Australia are also going to be playing India in another women's test. So that potentially suggests that somebody in the BCCI is now going, oh, women's tests, we should play more of those. And that could be really exciting, because we know that the BCCI are very influential in international cricket, and that's probably an understatement. But yeah, it could be really exciting, and I hope it does. I'm always kind of slightly skeptical about these things, having seen them before, and it hasn't necessarily led where we want it to.
Thank you so much, Raf, for joining us on this episode. Okay. We could have spent all day chatting about your career and everything else, so it's so hard to try and cram it into an hour, but thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Just like, it's so great what you are all doing, and congrats on the CricketHer, because that's really exciting and you totally deserve it.
Oh, thank you. Honestly, you know what I'm like, I get emotional. But yeah, I think, Alex, you just need to get Raf's social media details, don't you, to put on the end of the podcast as well?
Yeah,
we forget.
So Raf, where can our listeners find you across social media platforms if they want to follow you, they want to follow CricketHer, and just engage with you really on social media?
So my personal Twitter is at Raf Nicholson, and the CricketHer handle is at CricketHer, so CricketHer. And then obviously it's crickether.com is the website. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Massive thank you to Raf for coming on and being a guest on the podcast. It was really interesting to get her perspective on all things women's cricket, especially the Hey Ho Flint Trophy. And to all our listeners, if you want to keep up to date with everything we're doing, you can follow us on Twitter at WCricketChat and on Instagram at Women's Cricket Chat. And if you want to give us a like on Facebook, we are Women's Cricket Chat. And if you wanted to give our personal Twitters a follow, Hannah is at Hannity1194 and I'm at Alex Jane Pereira. This has been Women's Cricket Chat. Tune in next time.